Well, good morning. As I begin, I want to share a quick story about a young man. Had a few struggles. We'll just call him Tim. That's not his real name, but it's kind of a popular name around here too, by the way. But Tim was a good kid, and he finished school, and but still wasn't really sure about his future. Kind of more of a homebody. In fact, people would say he was shy. Sometimes they might even say he was a little too timid. Well, still he was a good kid, just trying to figure out what he was going to do with life. In fact, he also sometimes he stayed close to home a little bit because he just seemed to have some health issues. And after a while, this was kind of wearing on him, and he wasn't really quite sure if he understood what his purpose was and if he would ever figure out what his purpose was. Well, that all changed one day when this really neat missionary came to town. And he started talking about all the cool people he had met around the world and all these neat places, being part of God's purpose of taking disciples and making disciples and just bringing the gospel to the world. And this just really got Tim excited as he was listening to this missionary. Well, later that day, that missionary met Tim, and they hit it off and started talking. He could just sense something inside of this young man. And in fact, that missionary said, "Tim, why don't you join me on the journey?" Now, that kid's real name is not Tim, it's Timothy. And you can read his story here where these two met in Acts chapter 16, verses 1 through 31. It says, "He," that being Paul, "came to Derbe and then to Lystra, where a disciple named Timothy lived, whose mother was a Jewess and a believer, whose father was a Greek. The brothers spoke well of him at Lystra and Iconium, and Paul wanted to take him along on the journey." I think this is our scriptural example of the very first student or a young person that was invited to join a mission team. This goes way back in the earliest days of the gospel. Isn't that a cool story? And that was kind of what I would call the very first disciple trip. All right? And I'm here today to talk to you here. Darren and I are going to talk to you about disciple trips. It started about 2012. It was a dream that had dated back even 20 years before that. We started with our first trip in 2012. Corey was on that trip. And there were 7 people. We went to one place, all for one purpose. Well, this year, after 8 seasons, you can see we've taken 700 people to 37 places. Again, all for that one purpose of taking disciples and making disciples. In fact, I think several people in this room have been on a disciple trip. If you've been on a disciple trip, raise your hand. Look around, all right? And so and a lot of these people now are in AIM, and some are even in SIBI, the guy that just did the prayer, the Salonkers, we love them, and others as well. So in fact, we've grown so much that we decided, and you're going to see we key on these words, people, places, and purpose. And so we've had so many people go, we need help. And so we've invited Darren Bible to be our director of operations. And very soon when he finishes school here in about 3 more weeks, he will be joining us full time. We're so excited about that. So Darren got to be part of this story with us earlier this year, and I'm going to turn it over to him and let him share with you some of the things that happened on the disciple trips he was a part of. So Darren, come up here and share with us, brother.
So I was able to go on 2 trips this summer, and both of them couldn't be more different than each one of them because they just had their own uniqueness. So I'm going to kind of walk you through both trips, so that if you're interested in going on a disciple trip or you want to know more about what it is, you can see kind of what took place on these 2 trips. But the neat thing about disciple trips is it's not cookie cutter. We don't just do the same trip everywhere we go. We're partnering with missionaries and congregations that are established, and we're going there to help them with what their needs are. So we're not going and forcing our agenda on anyone. It's all God's purpose. That's what it's all about. So we're partnering with these congregations and missionaries and saying, what do you need? What can we do to help you? And that's what we did in both these places. So I'm going to step aside so you can see the pictures and kind of walk through what each trip looked like. The first trip was to Antigua. And so if you don't know anything about Antigua, it's an island in the Caribbean. There's actually 2 islands. It's Antigua and Barbuda. And they're a country. These 2 islands make up this country. And it is an English-speaking island, so that plays to a lot of people's ability to speak English. So that's a good thing sometimes. Not all the trips are in English-speaking zones. So for this one, it was English speaking. And we took a group of 25 people. So it was a large group that went on this trip. And we ranged all over the United States, but mainly Texas and New Mexico were a big portion of who went on this trip, and then one girl from Florida. When we got to Antigua, we just hit the ground running and broke into small groups and just went around the community. So when we're in Antigua, we stay at the church building. They have facilities where we can stay there. So we went and basically blanketed the area around the church building, letting them know that we're going to have a vacation Bible school in the evenings. But mainly, we're just there to see how we can bless them, if there's something we can pray for them about. So we're just going out in the neighborhoods, seeing how we can bless that area. We also did service projects, and of course, most short-term missions are known for painting something. So we went and helped this brother. His name's Brother George, and he's got a prosthetic leg, and he's got this house that he just keeps adding on to because his family, he's taking care of a large part of his family. He's on a very limited budget, and so we tried to help him out. Now, George is just an amazing servant of God, and is not looking for anything for himself. So this was neat to give back to him. All his grandkids were there, which helped the cuteness level just go up a couple notches. It was fun to paint around them. Sometimes it was interesting. But it was just beautiful to help a brother in Christ, give him something that he can look at and be happy with. And he also has, like I said, he has a prosthetic leg. And many of these houses there, they're all elevated. Many reasons that they're elevated off the ground. But if you go around, both in this area and in Belize, the next trip we went to, most of the people's stairs leading into their homes are pretty treacherous. I had a hard time getting up his stairs, and I have two good legs. And I mean, it was really complicated because there was really a lot of warping and stuff. So we built him a new set of stairs. All of this just really touched his heart. He's a giver. He just gives to the congregation all the time. And now we had a chance to bless him. So that was one thing we did on this trip. The other thing is we had an evening VBS. If you know anything about me, you know how much I love VBS. It's a lot. I mean, it's off the charts how much I love VBS. But I have never did a VBS where I was the only one singing, but it happened. This community, these kids come in pretty, kind of like an M&M. They have a hard shell on the outside. They don't want to smile. They don't want to participate. They've been raised in a culture that says you don't basically act like that. Everything's mean, and you solve everything with your fists. So that first day, I felt pretty lonely up there doing the hippo song by myself. Even the Americans weren't singing with me, so it was pretty rough. But anyway, but by day 2, things changed dramatically. Day 3, it's a whole other world. One of the things I love about ministry is just seeing people's faces light up. And by day 3, all those kids were singing. Not all of them. 3/4 of them were singing, and they were smiling. And it was just a blessing to be a part of helping them see that there's another way to live that isn't hard, that you can have joy even in the worst of situations, that Jesus has an answer for your life beyond just the physical things of this world. And so by day 3, that was the faces we were seeing, and it was a blessing. So VBS was an amazing thing to be a part of. Plus, it gives those kids a connection with that congregation. So even though we've left, they still connect that building with a time that they saw something different in their lives. They heard about something different. Many of them had never heard some of the stories we were telling them about Jesus. Another thing we did is visited some of the nursing homes and a children's home for disabled children, a hospice care facility. And we just went and blessed the people of that community. The whole time we went, though, we brought people with us from the congregation. But we were able to just sit and talk with members of those facilities and just bless their lives. And they blessed many of our lives just telling their story. And they just wanted to talk with somebody. And so we had a real blessing doing that. That was Caleb Thornton's brother. But here's where I got stretched out of my comfort zone. So we did something called street preaching. Now, Tim Brumfield spoke Friday about street preaching, about people, hollering at you and being on a bus and kind of being in your face. And That's not what we did. So I was glad to hear that. But when you hear the term street preaching, that's kind of what you think of. But street preaching in Antigua is we get the whole congregation together, the whole team of disciple trips together, and we go to a member's front yard. She has a large front yard right in the middle of the city, and they set up a speaker. It's pretty dark, so we all have these glow-in-the-dark necklaces on to kind of illuminate us. And we just sing and sing and sing, and then somebody gets up and gives a little 5-minute lesson or 2-minute lesson on Jesus. It was raining, so sometimes you got a little help with that. But I show you this picture because I don't know how well this would work in the United States. In fact, I really don't think it probably would. I think probably the cops would be called to say, shut this thing down. But in Antigua, what you see on the back of the group is people coming out of their houses and just standing at the peripheral, at the edge, listening to what we have to say. So is that going to bring someone to Christ? I don't know. But it's planting seeds. And it's planting seeds in a unique way that we maybe don't have the ability to do here, but it's something that's okay in that culture. And I'm telling you, that was one of the highlights of the trip for me, is just stretching myself out of my comfort zone to do that. And of course, there's lots of little kids that want to come and be a part of that too, but there were a lot of adults that were right on the edge just listening to what was spoken. That's basically the end of that trip that I'm sharing with you, but I want to share one more thing about this. Disciple Trips is about faith taking flight, getting out of your comfort zone, stretching what you think you can do for Christ. There was one young man, he was in high school, and I'm not going to mention his name, but what a blessing this young man was to have on this trip. He was a true servant. If something needed to be done, he was going to do it. But you could tell he was not comfortable, with some of the things because of his age and just he's never stretched himself to do some of these things. But at the end of the trip, on our flight home, he's sitting next to a couple that aren't part of our team, just a random couple, and he's telling them about our trip, and then he tells me the next thing that came out of his mouth was, "Is there anything I can pray for you about?" Now, to us, that may not sound like a big deal. That was a huge step for this young man, to finally start expressing his faith to people that he didn't know. And that's one thing I love. From my first trip as a youth minister a number of years ago to this trip, I have never come back from a short-term mission trip the same person. I've been stretched in some way, convicted of something in some way. I never come back the same. And that's what I love about short-term missions. Mr. Terry mentioned that last week, that if you've never stepped out and done something like this, it changes you. It changes you for the rest of your life. You'll never see people the same. You'll never see your circumstances the same. So that was the trip to Antigua. The next trip was down in Belize, which is on the northeast coast of Central America, right at the tip of Mexico. It, as well, is an English-speaking country. This is the group we took to Belize. 13 of us went. Now, that's a much smaller group, but for some reason, and I'll tell you some of these thoughts, but Satan was trying to thwart this trip from the get-go. He was trying to stop this trip from happening, period. Jeff broke his arm where he wasn't going to be able to go. There was some things going on in the congregation down in Belize that really we were there to help them through. There was some leadership issues, and people were actually stopping coming to church. They were falling away, and they were looking forward to this trip coming and building the congregation back up, helping them get their faith back on track. And it was just one thing after another, and it looked like this trip wasn't going to happen. But it happened. James Lindeman, he ended up leading the trip. Jeff called him to see if he would. He's a graduate of here a few years ago. I went to help with the logistics of the trip, but it all worked great. Let me tell you about some things that happened here. There's two congregations, one in Dangriga and one in Siltgrass, and we were able to worship with both congregations. Their preacher, Ray Gordon, you may remember, was here at the beginning of this term. Jeff introduced him. He came and visited. And their congregation, both of those congregations are just the most beautiful people, the most wonderful people. But they're losing some members because, again, there's some leadership issues and they were falling away. So we're like, what can we do to put this back on track? So one thing we did, of course, we did some outreach to the community. We went and visited the hospital. But here's what I want to get to. We went and visited those members that were falling away, that hadn't been showing up. They know DiscipleTrips well enough that they welcomed us to come and talk to them. They didn't push us away, even though I hadn't been on a disciple trip or some of the others hadn't been. They recognized that DiscipleTrips is here and we want to talk with them. And they were very open. And what we were doing in the evening was having a gospel meeting where different members would come and different members of our team would teach on things like humility, forgiveness, things to help them bring their faith back on track. And so many of these members ended up coming to those gospel meetings. We even met with one individual who had stopped coming, and she says, well, I think I need to be baptized. She hadn't been baptized yet, so James and his wife had a study, and we went down to the river and baptized her. So there were a lot of things put in place to help them grow in their faith. And then here's some pictures of the gospel meeting. But here's what I want to really get to. At the gospel meeting, we also had these breakout sessions where members of the team and members of the congregations just sat and talked about life, about their Christian walk. But I've got to hurry because we're out of time, but I want to get to this final point. This young man's name is Horace. First day we were there, I saw him at the door sitting just like that, the door to the church building, on the ground. And I didn't think anything of it. But that night when we came back for the gospel meeting, there he was sitting on the ground again. And so I sat down and tried to talk with him. He's very difficult to understand. He has a terrible stutter and just has a hard time communicating. But during that process, he ended up having a seizure, a very bad seizure, where he was totally unconscious, and that's the reason he sits on the ground. He has so many seizures that he doesn't want to, elevate himself and end up hurting himself. His legs have some issues. But anyway, through talking with him, and of course he always has this smile. Even when he comes out of a seizure, there's a few moments where there's no smile on his face, but as soon as he gets himself back under control, that smile pops right back on. But what he told me that first night that I was talking with him is he said, could you find me a place to live? Well, that's a pretty heavy question to ask somebody that just entered the country and is on a short-term mission trip. But I talked with him a little bit, and the situation is he's probably about 18 years old. His grandmother had raised him. She had died about a year ago. The rest of his family has essentially rejected him because of his disability. It's viewed kind of as a curse, and you're familiar with those kind of stories. And I said, brother, I'll pray about that because I'm not sure what we can do about that. Well, the minute I mentioned prayer, his face really lit up because he wanted to share his prayer life, which humbled me beyond belief. He said, I pray every night that God will keep me safe through the night. And I pray every morning that God will give me bread. He's so reliant on God. He puts his whole trust in God. And it humbled me. But what's interesting is, as the week progressed, many of the congregation were familiar with him, but they hadn't seen him on a daily basis. We're having a gospel meeting there every night. They're seeing him have a seizure every night. It's more than just on Sunday mornings when they come and they see him. Now they're seeing him every night. Our team is seeing him go through these struggles. Now the hospital, they provide him medicine, but they won't allow him to live at the hospital. There is no safety net in Belize. So we all, as a family, the congregations there and the team said, what can we do to help this boy? They don't have the resources. We have resources. They have manpower. They have people in place that can help him. So we set to work on the second to the last day building him a little house at the church building in Silkgrass. Now, he's in Dangriga. During the night in Dangriga, he says people will come up and kick him. They stabbed him the day we were the day after we left. They stabbed him through the hand just to be mean. So we wanted to get him out of that community. So Silkgrass is a very it's just an adorable community. It really is, where the whole congregation lives very close to each other. So we built this little house down at the church building in Silkgrass. And we didn't get to finish it. We got to almost finish it. That's our group and some of the members there. But the next day, the congregation finished it and sent us a picture. And then the next day after that, here's a picture of Horace going into his house. The congregation now is going to be on a rotation because it's a small little community. They're going to take him food every day to make sure he has food to take with his medicine. They're going to check in on him. It's at the church building. He's in a safer area, a safer community. But why I bring that up is you never know what God has in store for you when you step out on faith, when you get out of your bubble and you say, I'm going to just go. I had no idea that we would be a part of answering this young man's prayer that he prays every night, that God would keep him safe. And God said, I'm going to use you. I'm going to use you, DiscipleTrips, to help this young man that prays to me. I'm going to use you to help Venice, who really wants to put on Jesus in baptism, but she needs somebody to come and talk with her some more. I'm going to use you to be my hands and feet if you'll just go. I love DiscipleTrips because it puts God's purpose at the forefront. We're going to let Jeff close us out.
All right. Well, thank you, Darren. And we just wanted you to get a feel for what we do. And I know you guys know Darren very well. We're so excited he's here, part of this. So let me just have 2 minutes to finish up. Again, we're about connecting people, folks around the States typically. On this last trip that Darren was a part of, there was 13 people on that team from 5 different states. Isn't that cool how God puts together these teams? We train them with flight school, and we don't have time to talk about all that, but it's just neat how God blends us together and all these people from all these places. And then we go to certain places, again, be part of God's great purpose. And I want to end with this little story. The trip is just a catalyst. It's just an opportunity to help us stretch, to grow, and to be different people when we go home. All right. At the end of every trip, we talk about taking this mission home. You have a mission field in your own backyard, the other 300 and the other 51 weeks of the year, right? Well, this is, and of course, our purpose is to win souls for Christ, and you saw one of those. But not just where we go, but even back home. So this is a picture of some girls that are from a church in West Virginia, in Bell, West Virginia. Abby is the girl right here. Let's see if this, I don't know if this works. She's right. This is Abby, okay? Her dad's the preacher. This is Joseph, the preacher, Joseph Pauley. He heard about DiscipleTrips about 3 years ago when he came to the Vision Workshop and saw our table out there. And he was like, I've always been wanting to go and take some of my youth group. And so he took his daughter and a few other girls, and they went to Belize. Got to be there with Jessica and Daryl. And anyways, it was neat. But Abby, one of the things we do on these trips is we teach people how to share their faith and put a chain reference in their Bible. Abby went home and studied with one of her friends from school, and then she was baptized. That's Jaden getting baptized by Joseph. Jaden then didn't keep her faith to herself. She started inviting Trinity. This is Trinity here. And no, this is Trinity. There's Jaden. And so then a year later, March of this year, Trinity was baptized. Now this is kind of like 2 Timothy 2 verses 2 in action for us today, right? The things you heard from me, and trust reliable men who will in turn be able to teach others. And so you got Joseph bringing his daughter on a mission trip. He's taught her, he's baptized her years earlier. Then Abby takes her faith, shares it with Jaden, and then Jaden takes her faith. And Abby's been leading these girls in Bible studies on Wednesday nights ever since. Isn't that cool? To see people's, and that's kind of the whole thing here for me is people's faith is taking flight. And that's what we mean by, that's our vision. We want to see people growing. Faith taking flight isn't just a play on words. It's the idea of people's faith gets to newer heights, higher altitudes, and they take this back home. So what can I do? What can you do? Well, we'd like you to do 3 things. First of all, just pray for this ministry. We need all you folks out there watching this, as well as the folks in this room, pray for this ministry. It's a big thing. It's to take people and travel and do all that stuff. It's not easy. We need the Lord's blessings and guidance and strength for what we do. But number 2, you can send people. Now again, maybe some of you in this room are being, you're on support. You don't have the money to help support it, but you can send in the sense of sharing this vision with other people from your churches back home. We're really here to help small churches who don't have someone to organize mission trips for them. And so go back to your home churches. Tell your neighboring churches about this ministry, and there's opportunities for people from small churches to go on a mission trip, and we'll organize it and lead it for them. So help us send people, but really it's awesome when you get to go and experience it for yourselves, as many of you know, and it can just change and transform your life. So anyways, thank you for being part of this with us and listening, and again, be praying for us, and may God bless us as, again, we're trying to see people's faith taking flight.